Welcome, dear participants of the EUA CDE online annual meeting. I welcome you from the basement, actually, of the EUA office, where we have a little room for webinars. And I'm very pleased to start the second day of a conference, which is already very interesting and has led to a lot of food for thought with our keynote speaker, with Dr. Rajesh Tandon. Rajesh is founder, president of Participatory Research in Asia, and I'm sure you will explain to us what it means exactly. He's also co-chair of the UNESCO Chair on Community-Based Research and Social Responsibility in Higher Education, and this since 2012. He also heads the Forum for Indian Development Cooperation, and is also chairperson of the committee constituted by the University Grants Commission to carry out the pressures on the scheme Unat Bharat Abhiyan. I hope I pronounce it correctly. Background is engineering in electronics from IIT in Canberra, MBA from IIM Calcutta, and a PhD in management from Case Western Reserve University in the US. Rajesh is a pioneer of participatory research and has given new meaning to academic research by redefining the relationship between the researcher and the research. Now, Rajesh, I can tell a lot about your other obligation, including having served on numerous expert committees by the governments of India, by the UN, by the Commonwealth and the World Bank, and many other roles, but we are here to listen to you. So please, Rajesh, we are looking to your presentation and subsequent discussion. Thanks.
Thank you, Alexander. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, colleagues. And I'm delighted to be able to interact with you all today on the second day of your annual conference. We are all trying to learn to work on important issues in a digital mode. So here I am. I have entitled my presentation because we are exploring international collaboration post-pandemic, and you all are becoming professional researchers as doctoral students. So I have titled my presentation Knowledge for Public Good. And I'll explain to you in a minute why I am calling it Knowledge for Public Good. Now, let me see if I can move this beyond the cover page. So, what happened since 2020, 2021, in these 20 months of the pandemic? In our region, research and scientific research came under unusual public gaze and scrutiny. Before this, very few ordinary professionals, ordinary mortals, ordinary citizens, even politicians, and didn't bother about science or research, and least of all bothered about international collaboration. But suddenly, all eyes and questions in the media, in public debate, focused on science, scientific research, and international collaboration. The first corona case discovered in India in January 2020 in Kerala was a student who was studying in Wuhan University in China. So you can imagine, why were you studying there? Why was she doing there? All kinds of questions. She must have been planted by China, all this. Then very soon somebody wrote in the newspaper article that an international research team comprising of US, China, and India was studying bats in our northeastern region, Nagaland, a state called Nagaland, which borders Myanmar and Bangladesh on that side. And people said, why is this international study on bats going on? Why weren't we told in advance? This study of bats is the one which is causing coronavirus in India. And then after, towards the end of 2020, when discussion on vaccines had begun, suddenly we discovered that our largest producer of vaccine, the Serum Institute of India, based in Pune, near Mumbai, was conducting vaccine trials in partnership with Oxford, the AstraZeneca vaccine. And people said, why are they conducting trials on Indians? So suddenly, scrutiny of science, and more importantly, research done in international collaboration. And then the Indian Bharat Biotech Covaxin discussion started, and suddenly people said, why is government funding this? Why is it public-private partnership? If government is funding it, the vaccine should be free, it should be scrutinized properly. Why it has been released for public use without completing the third trial? Even ordinary people who didn't know anything about vaccine research, etc., were saying, oh, it has not completed third trial. So as a result, a large number of even medical and paramedical professionals showed vaccine hesitancy in many Indian locations because they were not sure whether these vaccines had been properly tested. So the point I'm trying to make is that never in my 70 years of post-independent India, ever science and research and international collaboration over scientific research received such attention as it did in last 24 months. So it makes all of you interested in international collaboration to become more sensitive what people are going to scrutinize. It is no longer your conversation with fellow academics in other parts of the world. It is going to be looked at by citizens, by media, by regulatory agencies, by civil society, by all kinds of people. So I think it is important, therefore, what I am trying to say is that researcher responsibility and accountability of science and the scientific enterprise has become far more center stage in the discourse, not just in this region, but around the world. And you, as young professionals, as young researchers completing your doctoral research, need to become more sensitive and more informed about this. So I have included 4 issues that I think are important for you, and I have in this presentation included documentation. You can read it later, and there are other documentation available. The first thing I want you to read is the UNESCO recommendations on research and researchers. There are 10 recommendations. These were passed 3-4 years ago. All countries of the world, members of UNESCO, agreed to this. There are 2 recommendations which are particularly involved. One is the freedom of expression of scientific researchers. This became so important because when during the pandemic, some of the Indian researchers working in public institutions began to question the kind of treatment that was being proposed, they were silenced by the authorities. And we heard, you saw on the CNN and BBC what was happening in UK and Europe and in US, how the political authorities were silencing any kind of questioning or any kind of critical analysis by scientists. And this is your right. But along with your right to have freedom of expression, you also have an obligation about ethics. And this UNESCO recommendation strongly asks that all young researchers are oriented to ethical practices. And we tend to assume that there are universal ethics, but there are also contextual ethics. And so it's important to, in your collaboration, international collaboration, is not just look at ethical norms and protocols in your home country where you are based, but where collaborators are based. The second important issue that is coming up, and this is coming up in the context of, last year we had a very interesting debate before the lockdown in the Global University Network for Innovation on SDG 17. And SDG 17, as you know, Sustainable Development Goal 17 is about partnerships. And partnerships, partnerships are most misused phrase, and confusing. You know, uh, Partnerships always entail give and take, mutual respect, mutual listening, mutual accountability. And if there is no value addition in becoming a partner, then why partner? If you can do it alone, do it. You do partner only when you can't do it alone. You need something from the other, but the other is bound to be different from you. Because you don't have it, the other is bound to be different culturally, contextually, politically, financially, will be different. So how do you establish that mutual trust, mutual respect, and mutual accountability in partnerships and collaboration? And there are some very interesting papers and studies done in this for the scientific community that I think you should take a look at. Then the third important dimension is open science. This year, in 2 months from now, UNESCO Paris is going to convene in November a discussion among all the member countries on a recommendation on open science. And last year, we were privileged to have participated in some of those deliberations. And when open science debate started, scientists basically said, oh, it means open access. So you have data, you give open access to us. You have some digital tools for analysis, you give open access to us. So it was narrowly defined between scientists and scientists. No, more than that. Open science means openness to society, openness to other forms of knowledge which you consider many a times as voodoo science: indigenous knowledge, experiential knowledge, practical knowledge. In fact, when scientists last year were arguing about open data, they forgot that frontline primary healthcare workers, community organizers, local leaders needed practical scientific information as well, because they were the real healers and caregivers in the face of the pandemic. Not everybody could reach the hospital, and that was also not needed. So, science needs to be open to different ways of producing knowledge and different users of knowledge, not just scientists themselves. And therefore, open science has to be open to society. Now, these recommendations are at the last stage of finalization, and I would hope you will take a look at it. And once they are approved, then you will have to find a way to incorporate them in your practice. I have given a number of examples here in this. I have talked about many aspects that I am including here, and these are the resources that you can look at. Last point I want to make is that, as Alexander was introducing me, I learned heavy duty electronics engineering. But when I went to the field during my PhD research, I realized that all those people I considered as illiterate rural farmers were quite knowledgeable. And that there are many things about life and living in rural areas that I was ignorant about. And despite my elegant, globally recognized, all my batchmates of electronics engineering are the ones who have created Silicon Valley. Despite internationally recognized, accredited formal qualification, the knowledge that farmers had needed to be respected. But by that time, I had become very arrogant about my formal knowledge. And I want to just mention that this turned the tide in front of me. And this is one of the important lessons of participatory research: is value local knowledge, practitioner knowledge, experiential knowledge, knowledge produced outside the lab and outside the research institute. And that is the fundamental premise of participatory research. Let me stop here because I think question and answer will be more fun.
Thank you so much. Rajesh. There were indeed, I think, enough content for 4 other keynotes. But let's stay with the one we have. I just first would like to really invite our audience to use the Q&A, to ask questions, to intervene into our debates. Rajesh really opened a lot of different topics like participatory research, like open science, like research ethics, like academic freedom. So all of this can be topics to discuss. But I first, maybe until the first questions come, would like to start with one question. And many of the audience and our members in EUA CDE are people responsible also for doctoral programs, for developed trainings. So you talked about the importance for communal engagement and also forms probably who today you could also call citizen science or other ways to engage with community. Now, do you think this is something that you can train people? And if somebody would come to you and say, yes, I have maybe a group of researchers, or I want to train our researchers to get engaged in community, is there something you would say, yes, this could be a training for that?
Of course, of course. In the last slide, I've given you links to both the PRIA website and the UNESCO Chair website. I'll give you 2 examples we're doing. 3 years ago, just before the pandemic, the University Grants Commission of India, which is the national body of it, created a new compulsory stream of work for all undergraduate, postgraduate researchers called socially responsible research. And I was one of the members of that committee. And now I have designed a training program for master trainers of selected 40 odd universities, whom I will start training in a couple of months. They got delayed by a couple of years because of the pandemic and universities were shut down, etc. And the basic idea is learning to listen to communities, understanding their point of view, and articulating your perspective and expertise in relation to that point of view. This is one example. The second example is international. Along with my UNESCO co-chair, Dr. Bud Hall, we have been since 2018 conducting what we call Knowledge for Change, a global consortium. We now have 22 hubs in 14 countries where researchers, next generation researchers, particularly master's level researchers, are trained to be able to work together with the communities in formulating. The research steps remain the same: research question, data collection methods, analysis, dissemination. But when you do it in partnership with the community, the research questions get tweaked, the data collection methods get expanded, the analysis gets multiple perspectives, including communities, and the dissemination happens in forms beyond the conference papers. Because knowledge for public good means knowledge which can be acted upon, knowledge which can be used. And as a researcher, you may use knowledge to communicate with peers, but your community partners may use knowledge to bring about change in their community and negotiate change with government agencies and public officials. So it is not something that you do out of the blue. It is starting with the recognition that community has some knowledge relevant to the issue, and increasingly paying attention to it, listening to it, and trying to build on it. They may not have theoretical concepts and sort of references that as a professionally trained researcher you may have, but they have practical insights and they have actionable research questions on which they want action. And so if we want sustainability, community action is essential, not just policy action.
You mentioned that communities may have specific research questions and may want maybe the researcher to also take actions and get engaged. Now, yesterday in our panel on research, on academic freedom, all the panelists mentioned as one challenge or especially an important aspect of academic freedom is that academics can decide what they are interested in, and neither funders, nor political leaders, nor institutions, nor somebody else should force them to say, do your research in this and not in this. So when you say the research is engaged with community and the role, the differentiation between researcher and kind of research should be more equalized, how isn't this a risk for academic freedom that the society tells the researcher what they have to do?
Well, all freedoms, freedom of expression, freedom of movement, freedom of association, freedom of choice of religion, all freedoms are bounded within a societal framework. What the pandemic has shown is that the science enterprise and the scientists and the researcher fraternity, which was essentially talking to each other and not necessarily to anybody else in society, suddenly got attention. Many scientists couldn't handle media attention that came, the media questions that came, because they were not prepared for it. Now, you have a freedom to choose your subject. If your subject requires engagement with, you can do your research in the lab, you can do your research with secondary data, but if you want to interact with some segment of the society in your research, there is no harm in asking them if they have any related research question. I don't think communities are stupid saying, suppose you want to do research on water quality and you are a student of hydrology. It doesn't mean the community will say, no, I want you to do research on cattle. No, they're not going to say that. They know that you are incompetent to do research on cattle. You're competent to do on hydrology. So they will say, but when you do water quality research, can you also look at our well and the pond in addition to the river where you are going to research? And can you examine this issue, why our animals who drink water from the pond are getting this disease? Oh, that's a valid way of engaging. We sometimes, because we are trained as a researcher and we only move around with fellow researchers, we sometimes are scared to interact with ordinary citizens because we feel they may divert us. But let me assure you, ordinary citizens are as smart as we are, if not smarter. They're not stupid. They're not going to ask a hydrologist to study cattle. They're going to ask hydrologists to study water bodies only.
Thank you very much. When you say, and this is a new approach to research, including also the needs and interests of communities, now when we look into the current also research assessment systems and the mostly valuation in some countries that you publish in some high-level journal, and especially some development countries with the interest to increase their global standing, actually even giving some really strong incitements for researchers to publish internationally. Do you think the current publishing system makes it possible for a more community-oriented research?
Well, you are right. Current system of publication, if you look at it, even the open access publication, what is touted as open access the last 8-10 years, many of the researchers do the research. It is their labor. Researchers write the paper based on the knowledge produced. Many of the times, researchers have to even pay to publish in open access. And 2 years ago, I got a request from some journal to review an article for publication. And in order for me to review, they asked me to pay 100 euro. I said, you should be paying me 500 euros for review. So this business that has become is hurting the researchers, not just the society as a whole is being hurt as well. So the problem is that a bunch of global journals, we had a debate with colleagues in Indonesia recently, and they said our government is asking our researchers to publish in European and American journals. Well, we work in Bhasa. We don't work in English language. And why should we produce in Bhasa journals than there? But if you produce and write in European or American journals, you get better rating. So the ranking system, the rating system, the individual assessment system has tilted in this favor. But I want to tell the young doctoral students, all of you there, that these are being critically questioned. And by the time you are ready, in 5 years' time, you may be more prepared to serve your knowledge for societal benefit as new journals and new publication sources are emerging. The digital platform itself is emerging as a source for more egalitarian and open sharing. So, yes, that tension exists, and I appreciate that. But I think many of you, as young doctoral students, have taken all kinds of risks in your life, including fighting with your families. So go take another risk. You don't have to subject yourself to the regime which tightens you in one corner.
Thank you very much. Related to this question also about this translation role of research, we have a first question, or better a comment, of Dimitris Athanasiadis, and he sees that PhD candidates are doing science and write and think according to scientific terminology. It takes of another person to translate the scientific language to a language understood by society. So the question would be, is it not ask a bit too much from a doctoral candidate who has a limited amount of time, who has a lot to do, to say, yes, and now you need to make kind of a second thesis where people can read easily?
No. Why should the same person do 500 different things? No need. This is why we partner. As I said in the beginning, we partner with those who bring to table what we don't have. Now, in many countries, and I am aware quite particularly on continental Europe, that you have the movement of science shops, you have movement of citizen science, you have civil society groups, if you particularly take around climate issues, which are very active. And I think if you partner with them, they will translate, adapt your findings in a way that engages. But you should be also available as a public intellectual. If you have produced the research, and if people want to ask you questions, what does it mean? What does it mean? Engage with it. We tend to feel uncomfortable when we have to deal with public. We are more comfortable when we deal with fellow researchers. But that is only because that's all we know. If you move around, it's like going to another culture. You come to India, you may feel a little uncomfortable in the noise and the crowd. And I go to Switzerland and I get uncomfortable because there's nobody around. I feel lonely on the street. Everybody is gone. I wonder where have they gone, hidden away, or there's a bomb scare, or why there's nobody on the street. So that you get used to it. Once you move around in different cultures, you go and attend your, go to your Sunday fruit farmers market and stand in one place with a civil society person and say, I'm going to share with you my findings on how to grow more ecologically organic fruits. 10 minutes. Well, you will be nervous initially, but people will clap for you. They say, yes, here is a researcher who brings knowledge to us.
Well, thank you very much. So looking, and you already mentioned some key issues like the SDG, like climate and so on. How do you think will the world of research in the next 20 years change? Will it be still the geography with some centers, especially in some world regions? Or do you think like SDGs, like the fact that, for instance, climate question need to be researched in different places? Or now with the pandemic, that the vaccine production may not only be in some places, but it would be better if it's produced in several parts of this world. Will we see a change in the topology of research on a global scale, or will it stay the same?
No, frankly, Alexander, you know the history of the research enterprise as it has evolved in the last 200-300 years. And that history has been one of, colonialism and dominance in sources. Even today meaning till recently, research funding much larger amounts of research funding are available in the European Union and UK and US than they are available in other global south. And many global southern researchers partner with academics of the global north. But it is the same model as happened with the logic of global supply chain, economies of scale. I don't know whether you have experienced it, but the production of chips for electronic items is concentrated in only two countries, Taiwan and Korea. And supply chain has been disrupted. For first 3 months of the lockdown, there was no new laptops or mobile phones available in India. And the prices went up. And so everybody was saying, why can't we produce some of this here locally? Why? And the same thing happened to food. You can't produce wheat in one part of the world and transport it in another part. By the time you reach there, people will die of hunger. And this is what happened. The disruption to the logic of global supply chain was complete during the pandemic. And so I think people are learning that many things you can do locally. There is a grow your own food movement. In 100 kilometers, you should have 70% of your everyday requirement. Basic food, basic water, basic stuff that you need. Many of us, therefore, are saying that SDGs, climate issues, need contextual solution. There is no universal solution. We in India, we are talking about, of course, we have sunlight. We're talking about solar energy, but it's also a land with high density of population. So how many square miles of solar panel can you put without displacing people? And if you displace them, where are they going to go? They're going to come to Delhi and Mumbai. They're not going to go and fall down in the sea. So you have to find, you have maybe global principles, you have global discoveries, global axioms, but you have to have local solutions after applying them. And so it is impossible to say that only a few centers of research can address climate question. The coastal belt in Bangladesh and India border is very different from the coastal belt in Malaysia border. And yes, you can exchange and learn, but if you want to change things locally, your research must be very contextual. Achievement of SDG is not possible from New York or Geneva. Achievement of SDG is possible in every village and every town of every country. Only then it will happen, because its manifestation and solutions are local. People survived despite the pandemic in this large world. For 20 months of pandemic, a large number of people survived. Yes, many died, but large number of people survived because they managed solutions locally somehow when there was no mobility.
Now, when we talk about, and I still would like to invite the audience, if you have last question, please post them now, but I may have one or two questions more otherwise. So yes, as I understand you, and it was also clear yesterday, the world need more early career, early stage researchers. At the same time, we know from some parts of the world where up to sometimes 20% of school children doesn't go to school anymore due to the situation of the pandemic. So how do you think, or how would you convince, for instance, your government to invest actually more into research and early stage research training when there are actually a lot of other also economical and political problems we are confronted with?
Well, this is always has been a question of whether you should invest in primary education or tertiary education and post-secondary education. The increasingly, I think, the purpose of research will invite many private sector investment, many partnerships which will add value. Many a times researchers, early career researchers, need a lot of support, which need not come in the form of only a scholarship, but other forms of support. So I think it may not be that the change will happen overnight. It may not be that small countries like Nepal or Bhutan may suddenly have large number of researchers. But given Bhutan's sociogeography, given its ecological nature, they may specialize in mountain-based sustainability, climate questions more than, let us say, Sri Lanka, which is just a tropical island. And so I think this specialization will be the basis for new forms of research. There was a time when we had, sort of common global research questions, but I think we are moving towards more locally appropriate knowledge solutions, which can help policymakers as well as communities to deal with the impending crisis that we are all experiencing due to climate change and the post-pandemic recovery.
Before I give you maybe the chance to have a last statement, one question which may arise, especially when we speak about local knowledge, local form of research, is at the same time we have, or we believe, or many, or maybe should not, but many believe that there are individual principles how research should be done, also connected to research ethics and integrity. And it's certainly everywhere in the world that you do not plagiarize maybe a principle and other elements. What would you say to somebody that or who questions how to connect on one hand universalistic approaches to how you should research and what are the ethical principles independently from cultural differences and the need to adapt to local challenges and different approaches to research and science?
Well, I as a student of engineering, I was taught most of the formula which said, given pressure and temperature remaining constant. And in physics, the pressure and temperature remains constant only in a lab. It never remains constant outside the lab, So, most of our universal knowledge systems are assuming that conditions remain the same. Conditions are varied. Even within a country, within your conditions are not the same. The social geographies are different, ecologies are different. With the changing nature of the mix of populations in many European and North American countries, you have people from different varieties of DNAs and body types and all this. So particularizing your knowledge does not mean you are diluting your principles. It only means that you are taking greater attention to how that knowledge will work in this context. So you can say that those who work in the labs, they can continue to pretend that everything is universal. But those who want to take their knowledge for improvement in the lives of people in whatever form will have to particularize it. And it need not be the same researcher doing both the things, but there can be ways of partnership. There can be ways of working together, even for policy research, even for practice research. I think, and by the way, many indigenous communities around the world, from Canada to New Zealand, those indigenous communities have their own ethical protocols, which they negotiate. And the scientific research funding bodies in several countries of OECD respect those protocols. They are different from the Western European protocols. So we have to learn. I mean, human capacity is amazing. You can work with diverse situations simultaneously. I don't think that's a problem. It's just the problem is that when we think this is the only model or this is the only way, we know that systems thinking tells us that there are multiple ways to reach the same end, and it doesn't have to be one way. We tried the one-way model post World War II, trying to develop everybody the same way. US has been trying to fix democracy in Afghanistan for 20 years. You saw what happened. So there is not one way. There are multiple ways. There are shared values and principles, and those must be respected. But there are multiple ways.
Okay, so with this mentioning of our shared values and practices, shared principles, but being respectful of different ethics and different ethical protocol, and I think respect and exchange and partnership of collaboration are some terms you have mentioned several times, and I think this definitely will be very fruitful for our conference. So our time is over. We're already 1 minute over time. So Dr. Rajesh Tandon, Rajesh, thank you very much, also in the name of EUA CD, of our whole community, for this really a lot of fruit of thought for us. And I hope you have maybe some time to be with our conference. Otherwise, we are very much looking forward to our future collaboration. Thank you very much,
Alexander,
Rajesh.
and thank you, colleagues, all of you. Best wishes. You are doing important work. Keep doing it.
Thanks.
Thank you.